Hello, dear viewers. This is Monika speaking. Today, I would like to share my thoughts on the work of Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett with you. I will address topics such as the two King Arthurs as well as the confusion surrounding Lucius Artorius Castus, Glastonbury and Avalon. Finally, I will provide you with factual information about the Pro Anima Artorius Silver Cross, which Richard Melbourne had found on the grounds of the ruined St. Peter's Church above Brinna in Glamorgan, southeast Wales. If you are interested in my presentation, then please stay tuned because it will be exciting. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. We will now begin with my thoughts on the topic of allegedly pseudo-history written by Geoffrey of Monmouth and Wilson and Blackett, who are repeatedly accused of pseudo-history. Perhaps I should mention again at this point that Wilson and Blackett recognized from the beginning of the research that Geoffrey's writings regarding timelines and kings, etc. were not in the correct order. Wilson and Blackett reported extensively on Robert Fitzhamond's conspiracies in their book King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent. And I mentioned it in my German King Arthur book as well, and also here in my presentation. Perhaps you should rewatch the video if you missed it. The problem is that critics don't read Wilson and Blackett's books, and consequently they are unable to take note of what they have to say on the respective topics. My advice is for those people, it's better not only to read the book Holy Kingdom, but also the books Alan wrote without Adrian Gilbert. So no one should carelessly claim that Wilson Blackett did not accurate research or that their work is pseudo-history. You should really read their books. Then you would discover that they took their work very seriously, even more seriously than any other historian from the academic world. I hope that my presentation will help to get out of the way some of the incorrect accusations and negative criticisms towards Alan Wilson. Now it follows a brief biography of Alan Wilson written by his late colleague Alan Hassel. Alan Hassel was a metal detector from Australia. Now today we will be discussing Wilson and Blackett's work, and I hope that my lecture will help to dispel some of the common accusations and negative criticisms leveled against Alan Wilson. A brief biography of Alan Wilson written by his late colleague Alan Hassel is as follows. Quote 1. Higher education. Alan Wilson studied at Cardiff University, where he earned a degree of economics and history, and also studied archaeology for 2 years, passing the exams. Quote 2. Employment occupations. Alan used his economic qualification to work in industry. Also, history was and still is his favorite subject. He achieved managerial status and worked as an international consultant in heavy engineering and shipbuilding. He was a Swedish consultant sent into the Upper Clyde shipyards in 1972 to master the plan, the reconstruction after the workers staged a famous work by barricading themselves in the yards and continuing to work whilst preventing the management from entering. Near total reconstruction to build Panamax ships, maximum size ship that can go through the Panama Canal. Alan was skilled in organizing thousands of men in dozens of departments and in dozens of trades and industries, using millions of man-hours and a huge variety of machinery and tools and services to get the desired result. Quote 3. First love for history, solo and collaborative. About 1950, Alan started to take an interest in his own history, and in doing so, he started a long, slow process of evolution that would take him all the way back to the Dark Ages and eventually King Arthur. At first, he was on his own, visiting his libraries in Cardiff, delving into books in search of the truth about the legendary king. In fact, he became a regular visitor and he was always on the lookout for old rare manuscripts that he used as references. One day, he realized that someone else was looking for the same books as he was. That person was Baron Blackett, who was told by the librarian that Alan had the book he was seeking. Baron introduced himself to Alan and as a result decided to pool their efforts in order to speed up things. End quote. Now, a list of manuscripts that Wilson and Blackett worked and analyzed in details are following. All quotes are from their book King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent, pages 12 to 13 and more. First, the Welsh Annals or Annals Cambriae. It's the earliest copy manuscript A of the Harleian collection of the British Museum in London. The Welsh Annals begin with the date 444 AD and the entries continue up to 954 AD. Then follows a 27-year gap and an entry ending the Annals in 1977 AD. Manuscript B is held in a public record office from Isidore of Seville's origins, for it begins with the creation of man. The form of the Welsh Annals closely resembles that of a modern diary. There are entries concerning Arthur. The first occurs in 516 AD, namely, first, Battle of Badon, second, Battle of Camlan, possibly killed at Camlan, possibly. Two different words are written for the word battle in 516 AD. There is waith, the British word from which we derive the modern Welsh cut, battle. All these suggestions that the entries are in fact of early date, being made by contemporary different authors or writers. The B manuscript has a fuller account of the event, quote, Battle of Camlan, in which the famous Arthur, king of the Britons and Mordred, his betrayer, died of wounds they inflicted on each other, end quote. This is an interpretation of an earlier cryptic entry and probably wrong, for Arthur probably lived many years after Camlan. End quote. To find out more about it in detail, please read the chapter itself. It would go beyond the time frame here. Next, Wilson Blackett mentioned the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, quote, it marks the commencement of written records by the Saxon Angles and other tribes in Britain in place of oral verbal records held in songs and recited lists. Recording began around 616 AD. The Saxons and other Germanic tribes were illiterate before their conversion to Christianity, when Augustine and his successors imported the written techniques of Latin. End quote. Page 13. Next, Bede's ecclesiastical history of the English people, quote, Bede being made diacon at 19 around 692 AD and ordained priest at 30 in 703 AD. Bede stands out as the finest of the earliest historians of Britain, English or Welsh. End quote, page 18. Next, the Book of Llandaff, Liber Landavensis, quote, It is the ancient chartulary of register book of the Cathedral of Llandaff. In it are recorded the biographies of the more eminent of the bishops of the great cathedral, the grants of endowment to the church by the kings and princes and other matters of importance and interests to the cathedral and the whole diocese. End quote. Page 23. Now, Noe ab Arthur, who was the son of King Arthurius ab Moiric, is mentioned, etc. Then Wilson and Blackett mention later historians they worked with. Namely, they appear to contribute to distant times and events. Quote, They do not necessarily contribute less to our knowledge of the period of Arthur, for they may well have had access to additional and different sources to those used by Gildas, Nennius, Bede, and the compilers of the Welsh Annals and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, end quote, page 20. Next. Culture dependent upon memory, page 29. Next, the Welsh and their love for genealogy, page 30. Quote, The primary requirement of the Welsh was that a man be of good birth. Good birth, or ancestry, was in itself a different concept to that of England, for in ancient Wales, both illegitimate and illegitimate offspring were equally regarded in matters of inheritance. The Christian ideas of stigma attached to children classed as bastards did not apply. The major difference lay in the concept of an equal share for all. All sons inherited an equal share of their father's estate. In addition, all held equal nobility and rank as a result of being descended from illustrious forefathers. This is, of course, a direct contrast with the medieval feudal system, which preserved and enlarged estates when the eldest son inherited a father's titles and lands. End quote. Other sources they worked with, Ruticilio, the 6th century Welsh saint, or Saint Taylor himself. It's also called the Chronicle of the Kings of Britain. Then, of course, Geoffrey of Monmouth. Please note that the confusion of timelines and names caused by Geoffrey was deciphered by Wilson and Blackett and ultimately put back in the correct order. Okay. Then they worked with folk tales and the Mabinogi, of course, etc. Now, what was Wilson and Blackett's main goal regarding the Arthurian investigation? Well, it was to unravel the medieval records of Geoffrey of Monmouth, and in doing so, they discovered that there were 2 King Arthurs from the same lineage, who existed separately over a period of about 150 years. One of them is the legendary historical King Arthur, namely Arthur ab Moiric. But Arthur I, also known as Andragatius, grandson of Magnus Maximus, son of Uther Pendragon, Victor Pendragon, also has a verifiable history worth investigating. In total, Wilson and Blackett were able to identify 5 significant authors, but only one fulfills all the criteria in connection with the legend. That has been falsely presented to us as the Arthurian romance for decades, if not since the 17th or 19th century. Over the centuries, his name, in connection with his explicitly royal genealogy, has been suppressed in academic and monarchical circles among the leading elite. Even on social media, people don't seem to want to admit that Arthur's roots lay in South Wales, specifically Southeast Wales, and that the Welsh border extended as far as the Scottish Firth of Forth as late as the 5th century AD. Because the extended border is almost unknown today, Avalon is still presumed to be somewhere in England, near Glastonbury, or on Bardsey Island in North Wales. Ridiculously, those unfamiliar with the subject claim that Avalon derives from Apple and Apple Island, and everyone believes it. How do I myself, as a foreigner, as a non-Brit, as a German, view the Avalon phenomenon? Well, I follow Wilson and Blackett's explanations and based on my logical reasoning regarding the exploration of the Welsh language. I can only agree with Wilson and Blackett when they say that Avalon is derived from the name Afalach. Next, they investigated who Afalach was, and Wilson and Blackett logically concluded that it could only be the Isle of Arran. At the time, at that time, it was part of the province of Valentinian or Valentine, since Valentine or Valentinian is the holy man Afalach in Welsh. Arran is clearly located in the north on the Scottish border with Strathclyde, formerly part of the province of Valencia. Now, who was Afalach? It appears he was the son of Benimau and Anna. She was the sister of Joseph of Arimathea. Since, according to Wilson and Blackett, the Valentinians were popular among the early Christians of Wales. This name, in its Latin pronunciation, may have gained popularity, especially from the early 4th century onward. This implies that Afalach played a significant role in the early Christian community in Britain, and that the name, in its Latin form, remained in use for many centuries. In the Mabinogi mythology, Afalach was likely the father of the goddess Modron. Insanely, Afalach Abeli is relegated to the fictional corner, where he is reduced to being the Celtic god of the underworld. Why the wounded King Arthur, and here we are speaking of Arthur too, son of Moiric, had to endure the long journey to the Isle of Arran in the province of Valencia is explained in the book King Arthur of Glamorgan, penned by Wilson and Blackett. Explaining the exact details would exceed the time frame here. Suffice it to say that some allies and supporters of the Norman monarchy were involved in the Arthur Glastonbury Avalon case, such as the historian William Camden and the antiquarian John Leland, as well as the monks of Glastonbury Abbey in 1191, out of greed to preserve their abbey. A certain Ralph of Coggeshall wrote accounts of the actual exhumation and a certain Giraldus Cambrensis visited the site and provided a detailed account of the events. Then a century later, in 1291 AD, a history of Glastonbury Abbey was written by one of the monks, Adam of Domerham. Fools like Edward I, King of England, and his queen Eleanor visited the supposed tomb of Arthur at Glastonbury, and it was even open so the king could see the bones, supposedly to confirm the claim. In fact, these were the remains in the grave of the Welsh prince Iestyn, direct descendant of the legendary King Arthur, King of Glamorgan, and Iestyn and his wife. The monks of Glastonbury wanted to save the abbey from ruin and decided to use the relics to attract more tourists to visit the abbey and so on. It's so interesting and so thoroughly deciphered and described by Wilson and Blackett. You should not only read the book Holy Kingdom, which Adrian Gilbert co-authored, but especially Alan Wilson's book King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent. I personally based my own book with my German translations precisely on this book. I recommend it to every Wilson and Blackett beginner. Far too many people were involved at that time for me to list them all individually here, but you should be aware of one thing. Nothing of the chaotic jumble that was ever written about Arthur in academic handwriting or after Geoffrey of Monmouth's death is true. You can find the names of all those involved and who were responsible for the confusion in Alan Wilson's books. However, if you already have trouble not questioning medieval academic Arthurian literature, and if you trust the medieval monarchy and its descendants, then just forget about searching for the truth. But please don't accuse Wilson and Blackett of inventing everything or not writing it down correctly. Anyone spreading such nonsense has either not read a single book by Wilson and Blackett in its entirety or simply has cognitive difficulties piecing together the individual puzzle pieces. That's just a fact, not an insult. Wilson and Blackett is not for timid people who blindly trust governments and the church. In my opinion, our entire system has been politically and religiously corrupted at least since the assassination of the last Western Emperor Magnus Maximus in 388. Furthermore, since the 6th century, it has been corrupted by unholy popes who were related to the monarchy, a practice that continued enduring the Middle Ages. The Papal States were only established in the 8th century by the donation of Pepin in 756. I think Pepin was a Carolingian. Please be aware that too many non-Brits simply had their hands in it. We should be ashamed of ourselves for failing to recognize the misery and instead denigrating Wilson and Blackett as fraudsters and inventors. There are others beside myself who are convinced of Alan Wilson's work, but who, for fear of being laughed at, do not dare to stand by their support, unfortunately. Also, out of respect for us Broadstock support for Wilson and Blackett, we should stop discrediting their work. After all, Alan Wilson worked for a long time as a shipbuilding engineer in northern Italy, and he gathered information on the side. Now ask yourself, which modern author or historian would do that today? Any other king or queen from the Anglo-Saxon, Norman, and Merovingian leading noble houses in Europe during the Middle Ages and up to the present day may celebrate their reputation in fame, glory, and splendor. Just not the Welsh king or royal descendants. Alan Wilson once said the following, and the statement can also be found in his books. He said, quote, "The Welsh royal line is actually non-existent, and it is ignored, but nevertheless, it is secretly used to highlight one's own weakening so-called bloodline." End quote. During the Middle Ages, Robert Fitzhamon and his wife Matilda of the Norman noble family apparently misused the Arthurian legend for their own agenda, as did William the Conqueror, the Carolingians, and the Burgundians. Theodosius I, and his Frankish ally Arbogast were to blame for the decline of the British Roman Empire as they waged war on European soil against the last good emperor of the West, Magnus Maximus. We also have Henry II, Count of Anjou, who forced the Glastonbury monks to deny the existence of King Arthur during excavations. However, King Henry II forbade the monks from saying they were King Arthur's remains because, according to Wilson and Blackett, Henry feared the Welsh King Arthur, even though Arthur, was long dead. Envy certainly played a major role in this matter, as these Germanic noble families would so dearly having loved to include the Welsh King Arthur and his early Christian ancestors, the Holy Family of Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea, Cunobelinus and Anna and their son Caradoc, one King David, Brutus and Aeneas of Troy, in their own faltering genealogies. Troy, the origin of the Welsh Britons who call themselves Cymry, is declared by both academic circles and, to some extent, on social media to be a fictional place that existed only in Homer's imagination. Generally, mixed marriages between the Norman and Welsh noble lines only occurred from the early Middle Ages onwards and not before. Prince Llewellyn ap Griffith married the Norman noblewoman Eleanor de Montfort, and Henry VII, Tudor, his Welsh father, married the Norman noblewoman Margaret Beaufort. It was hoped that this would bring geopolitical peace, but this hope was apparently destroyed by the Normans. Lust for power and self-interest. Power in politics and the church had played a major role in Europe since Theodosius I and the Franks conquered the West and East. This led to the creation of fictional and confusing legends, which were then applied to their own family dramas. These practices could perhaps be described as DNA theft. These are my own words, not Wilson and Blackett, okay? The film industry, which is also interested in King Arthur, commercially exploits him according to stereotypical models as a weak, nostalgic Celtic king or Norman heroic knight, overshadowed by Lancelot in an unrealistic mix of both figures. Sometimes Arthur is also incorrectly portrayed as a Sarmatian knight or as Artorius Lucius Castus. Anyone wishing to find out who Artorius Lucius Castus was should do further research. As far as I remember, Wilson and Blackett did no further research on this topic. Here are a few clues of mine. First, King Arthur I, Andragatius, lived from 355 to 388 AD. Commander of the Legion of Magnus Maximus, and his son, his grandson, conqueror of Europe, was killed in 383 in Sisak, in northern Croatia, during the great battle against Theodosius I, who promoted the conquest of Europe by Germanic Franks and under Arbogast and other Germanic tribes. Andragatius is considered the king of Greece, according to Wilson and Blackett. According to Wilson and Blackett, Geoffrey of Monmouth made the mistake of confusing the military campaigns of Magnus Maximus, Constantine, and Arthur I. Yes. Well, maybe this includes Arthur II, Arthurus ab Moiric II, by the way. A stone tablet inscribed with Lucius Artorius Castus was discovered on a church in the southern Croatian town of Podstrana. It is believed that he is buried there. According to modern Croatian sources, he is associated with a British King Arthur. Strange, isn't it? In my estimation, this can only be the son of Magnus Maximus, namely Andragatius, or King Arthur I, who existed about 150 years before the legendary King Arthur II of Glamorgan. I have no doubt about it. Killed in Sisak, northern Croatia, Wilson and Blackett found his tombstone in Atherstone, England, though. Point 2. Lucius Castus. Saint Lucius, King Leoric, Lucius Verus, lived in the second century AD, son of King Coel I. He went on a pilgrimage to Curia, the capital of Raetia in Switzerland, together with his sister Emerita, to spread Christianity. He and his sister encountered resistance from the local Helvetic Celts and they were allegedly murdered in the neighboring town of, now listen, Tiefenkastel. The monastery church of St. Lucy in Curia still houses alleged relics. A few bones. I visited the church last year and I saw the relics. The monastery church of St. Lucy in Curia still houses alleged relics of St. Lucius and Saint Emerita. So much for the subject of Lucius Artorius and Castus. I believe both events are true. Lucius Artorius, and I suspect a devastating case of mistaken identity conflating or even a cover-up. Castus surely refers to the place Tiefenkastel in Switzerland, near Curia. Who knows if this alleged Roman tablet from Podstrana in southern Croatia is even authentic or of a later origin. Nobody knows. The cover-ups could be too extensive. Yes, the world is fascinated by the story of King Arthur, but consistently refuses a proper explanation based on historical facts. Here are a few more explanations regarding Arthur's name, which often sounds different in various sources. Alan Wilson says the following, quote, "The different dialects in Wales, in the North and Mid Wales, in Dyfed and in the West, and in Glamorgan and Gwent account for difference, pronunciation and spelling. Arthur, Arthuis, Arthur, Arthur, and so on. And it all comes back to the different spellings and pronunciations of the names. Noe from Noah is also written Nugui, and Arthur in the mixed Irish Welsh Brittonic was Arthruis, or Arthruis, I can't spell it, sorry, in South Wales. Noi or Nugui in Dyfed is spelled Noe in Gwent. There is also a mixture of dialect differences between the mixture of people in Wales. These linguistic differences are in fact well known, and they are outstandingly represented in the 6th century by the dual Ogham and Latin inscriptions in southwest Wales on inscribed memorial stones. End quote. From Book King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent, pages 107 to 109 by Wilson and Blackett. To conclude this lecture, here are a few facts about the Pro Anima Artorius Silver Cross, which was found in September 1990 by the late Richard Melbourne on the grounds of St. Peter's Church in Glamorgan above Brenner. Point 1. According to individuals who were personal friends of Alan, no one currently knows the whereabouts of the cross since the deaths of Alan, Wilson, Baron Blackett, and Ross Broadstock. The families are apparently overwhelmed by the inheritance matters and may not want to have anything to do with it after they are concluded. We don't know where the cross is. It may be being kept by an unknown individual in England, Wales, or even in America. Personally, I believe the cross is a public treasure of historical and archaeological significance and should be given to a museum in Glamorgan. Point 2. A certificate of the cross with Arthur's inscription Pro Anima Artorius existed. Alan Wilson commissioned an independent laboratory to examine the metals. Whether the certificate and other artifacts of historical significance were saved from the recent house fire in which Baron died, or whether they are still lying around in the house or were even destroyed or taken away by unauthorized strangers or by authorized persons or by the families, we do not know. The house now has a new owner, a company which, however, has not yet taken care of the house or its condition. The house is in a devastating state of vandalism. Point 3. Some people speculate that the Knights Templar may have buried the cross inside St. Peter's Church. In fact, to this day, it is not entirely clear by whom and at what time the cross was actually left at the. Point 4. The test results are as follows, quote, "The silver result is subject to large measurement uncertainties at this high level of ±3%. The sample was only tested for the elements in this report and therefore may contain other elements, unable to test for gold. Issue 2, do a too in-depth description requested. End text. Further details as follows, quote, the metal cross 79% silver and weighs around 2.5 pounds. The metal content of silver with other metals is consistent with artifacts and relics of antiquity. The cross is over 9 inches long. It has been surface scan tested and a small portion was cut from the back of the cross for destructive chemical analysis. The certificate was signed by the operations manager. Date of test 30th of June 2003 by Body Code Materials Testing in Middlesbrough. Point 5. Sources on the internet prove that religious prayers bearing the inscription Pro Anima and name were quite common practice in churches from the 4th century until the 9th century. Maybe even in earlier times, maybe. Now, what says Wikipedia, Google? The term and practice of donatio pro anima, donation for the soul, where gifts were made to churches for salvation, emerged in Western Europe during the early Middle Ages, specifically developing from the 4th to the 9th centuries, becoming formalized by the 7th and 8th centuries as clergy mediated these exchanges for the sole benefit, with documented evidence appearing in charters and inscriptions from this era onwards. There is a historian or author, I don't really know. She is called Eliana Magnani, and she published a book in 2009 with the title Almsgiving, Donatio pro Anima, Offering in the Early Middle Ages of Western Europe, 4th to 9th century AD. Again, published by someone who is called Eliana Magnani. Point 6. Although the analysis of the metal conformed to the specifications of the time, it was not trusted. This particular document, Certificate Pro Anima Cross, was discussed and dismissed online by a reviled Arthurian history group. But that's a few years ago. Anyone who claims that the Pro Anima Artorius Silver Cross was never tested is either lying, trying to make Wilson's work look bad, or lacks expertise. Point 7. John Griffiths, Adam Griffiths' father, suggested the following quote: "The world also needs to catch up with the fact that the text isn't meant to be read as Latin only, but also forms a letter row, a pattern which primes an accompanying Welsh language decode." Adam is one of the admins of Britain's Hidden History group on Facebook. Now we come, finally we come to the to my conclusion of this lecture. Alan Wilson and his longtime colleague Baron Blackett deserve our full attention today more than ever, for their research is of immeasurable value. Unfortunately, in recent years, the historians Wilson and Blackett have been subjected to repeated personal attacks and false accusations. On 19th December 2023, historical researcher Baron Blackett has been killed in a house fire at his home in Benwell, Newcastle. This followed the recent tragic deaths of Ross Broadstock in October 2022, who had been heavily promoting the historical research of Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett, and the death of Barham's genius, co-author and forensic historian Alan Wilson, who died in September 2023 in hospital. For those who don't already know, somebody or some group attempted to murder Baron Blackett back in August 2011 using an incendiary device placed under his bed, creating a massive house fire, which very nearly killed him. This is a quote from Rich Planet TV, Richard D. Hall. So we're at the end of the lecture now, and I hope everyone liked it. Thanks to everyone, and I wish you all a blessed and happy Christmas and a happy and good New Year. Don't let anybody make you afraid. Yeah. Okay. Bye. Oh, wait. I have one last thing for you. So please stay tuned, because now the 7 slides about Avalon, Artorius Castus, and the pro-ANIMA Artorius Cross will follow now. Bye. So this is the province Valencia. As you can see, the pink one in the north. This is the supposed Avalon, Afalach, Valentinian, Valencia, Afalach. The correct location of Afalach in northern Britain is a vital part of the redefinition and correct reorientation of the story of the Arthurian period after crushing Mordred and his various allies, said to be Northern British, Picts, Saxons, Scots, Irish, and so on. King Arthur moved on up to the battlefield in mid-Wales, Camlan Dolgellau, in pursuit of the fleeing remnant of his enemies. He naturally moved into the territories of the rebels, and this was the Inis Afalach, the province of Valencia. He would have had to exterminate the rebels and pacify the area. The reasons for King Arthur going up to Valencia, Afalach, after his victory at Camlan, are self-evident. In addition, there are traditional references to Arthur having problems with Owen ap Urien in the area and negotiating with him. The Welsh, who always had difficulty with the letter V, called Valencia in their own tongue Afalach or Abalach, and this became confused with the term Avalon for the Glastonbury idea. So Wilson and Blackett say after the battle of Camlan, King Arthur went to Inis Abalach or Inis Afalach. Whilst Inis means island, it is also used to mean an open or cleared area or an estate, or a province of area. So in this case does not necessarily mean an island in the sea. It is when we get to the word Abalach or Afalach that things have tended to become confused in the past. Now, this is another quote from Wilson and Blackett from their book King Arthur, King of Glamorgan and Gwent, pages 178 to 183. This is when Arthur was crowned, I think. Another evidence, Arthur has to be Arthurius, the paramount king of Glamorgan and Gwent. The saints of the first half of the 6th century also help to locate and identify Arthur. There are several who claim close kinship with Arthur, including Iltyd, Samson, Cadog, and Dubricius. Samson, whose civilian rank was that of king, was able to claim that he was Arthur's nephew, and this through his mother, the daughter of King Moiric. I think this is Anna in this case. His father was Anundu or Difed, sometimes connected with Amorica. His uncle named Umbrafael, the brother of Amundu, who married another daughter of King Moiric. Now, this is the original construction and building. This is a manuscript. It's in the British Museum, Cottonian MSS TD. It's entitled A Chronicle of the Church of Llandaff from Brutus to the year of our Lord 1370 AD. It states as follows of the original construction and building of the Church of Llandaff. So, note please, I've only included the beginning of this manuscript here. Please understand that I cannot present everything here with screenshots. It would exceed the time available. You should read and explore the book King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent for yourself. Now, what does Wilson Blackett say about Dubricius? Our major interest in Dyfrig or Dubricius is that in 2 entries appended to the Book of Llandaff, he is linked with King Arthur. One entry records that Dubricius crowned Arthur as king of the Britons, meaning Wales, and the other that Dubricius receives large land and grants from Noe, the son of Arthur. Okay. By examining the pedigree of Dubricius, we find that his family was linked to the line of senior kings of the area from which we get Theodoric, Moiric, and Arthur. The simple generation technique shows that Dubricius was a generation 5 prince, as was King Moiric, the father of Arthur, who is, of course, a generation 6 king. This is valuable information, as Dubricius is recorded as being a bishop when crowning King Arthur at the age of 15. 15 was the normal age for royal princes to be acknowledged in the 5th and 6th centuries. Okay, what do we have else? I think we move on to the next file now. What do we have is a clear statement that Arthur was crowned king in Kirkeistor on Christmas Day in 506 AD. This certainly fits the general scenario and events and is not statement in any way connected with Dubricius, living on after 540 or 550 AD. Dubricius would certainly have been active as a bishop at this period, as the charters of grants made to him in the Book of Landgraf clearly indicate. There are 3 kings named in this document: King Theuderic, his son Moiric, and King Arthur. The oldest, Theuderic, is connected with St. Germanus, which is possible, whilst Moiric, a direct contemporary and cousin of Dubricius, had an eldest son and successor named Arthur, or Arthurius. It is this Arthur who would be of the age which is stated 15 years, around 506 AD, when Dubricius crowned Arthur. But the actual date probably is 517 AD. Okay. This is also a quote from Book King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent by Wilson and Blackett. Now we move on to the next file. Here you see a map from the internet of Wales. I believe it's 5th or 6th century AD. You see, Wales is very, very big. It reaches the Strathclyde north of England back in those days. Next file. Now we come to King Arthur I, and my suggestion that he could eventually be Andragatius, King Arthur I, grandson of Magnus Maximus. You can see this is Croatia North, Croatia South. Here in Sisak, in the north of Croatia, where is the location where King Arthur I, aka Andragatius, commander-in-chief of grandson of Magnus Maximus, was probably murdered in battle, according to Wilson and Blackett. Okay. Now in the south of Croatia we have Podstrana, where this mysterious stone tablet with the inscription of Lucius Artorius Castus was found, according to public sources. See? It's not far from, apart from each other, only about 460 kilometers. We move on to the next file. Now we come to the Artorius cross for the soul of Arthur, Pro Anima Artorius cross. The inscription Pro Anima Artorius is not poor, as all 3 are publicly listed in the list of Latin phrases on the internet. Pro Anima Artorius. The name's true origin is debated, but it's generally linked to Celtic art or artos, which means bear in the astronomic sense point of view, I think. The name's true origin is debated, but it's generally linked to Celtic art, artos, bear, or potentially Artorius, reflecting a mix of Celtic and Roman influences. This was a source from a quote from the internet. Now, again, the cross was found in September 1990 by the late Richard Melbourne on the grounds of St. Peter's Church in Glamorgan above Brynna. Again, the term and practice of donatio pro anima, donation of the soul, where gifts which were made to churches for salvation emerged in Western Europe during the early Middle Ages, specifically developing from the 4th to the 9th centuries, becoming formalized by the 17th and 18th centuries as clergy mediated these exchanges for the soul's benefit, with documented evidence appearing in charters and inscriptions from this era onwards. Now, next file. This is the book of an excerpt from the book by Eliana Magnani. She wrote this. She published this book in 2009, and the title is Almsgiving, Donatio pro Anima and Eucharistic Offering in the Early Middle Ages of Western Europe, 4th to 9th century AD. Okay, I'm quoting a sentence or two or three. Quote: during the early Middle Ages in Western Europe, charity practice, the pro anima donations and alms given to churches and monasteries had at its heart a complex system of historically defined representations in which the Eucharistic offering stood for a model of the exchanges between man and God. This system of representation evolved in three discrete periods of time, as we see through an exploration of writings on the doctrine of almsgiving and of epigraphic inscriptions and diplomatic acts from the 4th through the 9th centuries. End quote from Eliana Magnani from her book. Okay. So I think this cross pro anima Artorius isn't a hoax. It's probably a very old cross, and it's real. Next file, and this is, I think, the last file. Yes, this is again the certificate, which from Artorius pro anima Artorius Silver Cross. The certificate was signed by the operations manager, date of test 30th of June 2003 by Body Code Materials Testing in Middlesbrough. This is a photo from book Satanic Protocol by Grant Berkeley, Wilson and Blackett. The silver result is subject to large measurement uncertainties at this high level of ±3%. The sample was only tested for the elements in this report and therefore may contain other.